Welcome to Open Session 5. My name is Greg Stafford, and I host these weekend shows at times in place of the more regular show, which is CWJah Talk. The channel's about our belief in the God Jah and the historical documents and evidence that show the God Jah's involvement with people from Abraham to Moses to Jesus, and all the way back, of course, to people like Adam and Eve. So all of those things are involved in the biblical accounts and hence relate to the God Jah. But we also consider other things, including other histories and texts, other people's beliefs, because we're all people. We need to understand each other and do our best to work together, regardless of how much our interests or beliefs may differ. Now, at times, of course, things can get to a point where, as a society, we have a more or less difficult time working together, either as males and females, or sometimes men and other men in various competitive environments. And so, as a society, we're really a sort of living structure composed of different structures, namely relationships or people working together. That's what I mean by a structure, or not. And so when it comes to things like dating, marriage, or getting advice from other people about either one of those two things, it's a very big deal, obviously, because it can have an impact not only on us as individuals and members of a potential or actual family, but as I mentioned, as society as a whole, because it's built of these smaller structures, these smaller relationships of one kind or another. And so in these open session shows, what I do is I introduce a few ideas, topics, so to get the show going. It's basically just an opportunity to talk with me or me to talk with you about things that we believe or don't believe, but that we're interested in enough to talk to each other about. So as long as we can do so pleasantly, that's what we try to do. But otherwise, our shows are designed to promote belief in the God Jah, our reasons for why we believe Jesus is the biblical Messiah and why we're even Christian at all, and what that means. And essentially for us, it means treating others the way we want to be treated, in addition to worshiping the God Jah and following Jesus. So we don't promote every single thing that most other religious groups do to the same extent. We focus on those three things. But we also face the same issues that anybody else does, whether it's dating as people or getting advice from others when we're faced with difficulty. So what do we do when it comes to Christian dating? That's what I wanted to introduce this session about, because this comes on the heels of our Let's Talk Sodomy show yesterday, which I actually thought went very well. It's not an easy subject to talk about sodomy because, as I mentioned yesterday, it's often a personal issue with people because it involves sexual relationships. But as I started off this show explaining, our society is composed of these smaller structural relationships. And so the quality of those relationships and the things that take place in terms of their development and growth are what will ultimately show itself in society, because that's what it's made of. And so you can have a combination, a mixture, and so it's often not so easy to tell one way or the other. You see things, but until one form of society takes over versus another, there can be this sort of mixed bag, which I think is the kind of like the world we're in now, at least in the United States, and in a sense globally, because we're all somewhat connected through things like the internet or travel, convenient travel. So we're exposed to a lot of the same things and facing, as I mentioned, many of the same things when it comes to social media, its impact on our personal and interpersonal relationships. So Christian dating. Let me focus on Christians because I'm a Christian, that's what's on my mind when it comes to women and even other men, even though as a person in this world, I have to exist with everybody, right? They have to exist with me to the extent that our society permits, but I'm here to get certain things done. I'm not searching for a list of things to do. I know what I want. And so I've come to believe in these things that are related to history and events and peoples from our datable past to our current day. That is when it comes to explaining things like life, its existence, and then, of course, creation and how it happened. These are all things that we can explain based on scientific evidence, the life that currently exists being one of them. And so I use those beliefs to moderate my behavior to the extent that I'm able to, and try to keep myself focused on the things that are most important, giving my due to the life that gave life to life and that ultimately led to my life and every other life that I get to experience and that gets to live. So to me, that's the highest obligation. That's the number one reason why I'm alive, or should be, because it's the reason I am alive in the first place. That is Jah, the life who gave life to life. You can call him what you want, or her, however you refer to the life that I'm talking about. But the life that I'm talking about, I called Jah. And Jesus called the Father Jah, Jehovah, of course, in the language that he spoke. So when I recognize those things, and I'm not focused on things that are of lower value, right? It's not that there are other things that have no value in the world, but as a Christian, okay, I'm trying to explain why I'm introducing this as Christian dating versus just dating. A lot of what I'm going to say in a few moments will apply, I think, to Christian or non-Christian dating, but you have a lot of different religions and cultures, and so a lot of it will not apply, potentially. And these are not like rules and regulations. I will be referring just to one section of the New Testament, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, written by Paul, where he talks a lot about these things. And so I'll try to give some balance to that and explain and present what he's saying in the way that he said it. And so that's what Christian dating will essentially be related to. And then according to our modern day, and I think you'll see that the things he says are applicable in that way. But it's not for me to give advice to people, really, outside of the general application, the kind of overlap I mentioned that would apply to anybody, a relationship, unless there's a cultural issue, religious issue, or difference. It wouldn't be appropriate for me, for example, to talk to Muslims about how they should date, right? That's not my place. It's not my business. They don't believe the same things in the same ways. Some things, but there are enough differences to where it's not for me to start talking about how Muslims or Hindus or people with no faith at all, belief that is in a God or superhuman intelligence responsible for our existence, is that really for me to start talking about? I don't think so. In the same way, it's not for me, I don't believe, and feel free to comment in the chat if you think otherwise, to be talking about gay relationships, other than the acts like sodomy, right? We talked historically about what it is, and then in our modern day what it is, the difference between the accounts in Genesis 18:19. That is an abusive male attraction toward other males. It doesn't even explicitly refer to anal sex, although that's implied by the relationship that's described. And so, in any case, most people think of sodomy today as anal sex, not as just the abusive male toward male attraction when it's not wanted. You see, a forced attraction. You can read the account or watch the show from yesterday. But my point is that that's not my mindset. So I'm not here to give people with a homosexual mindset advice. How could I do that? I'm not really aware of or in tune with the thinking and needs of a person with that state of mind that has a certain physiology, anatomy, a hormonal system, sometimes out of balance and makes it more or less difficult, but still, the anatomy, the physiology, that's for them to deal with in a way that only they can understand and control or not. Now, I can comment on what I think is structurally and scientifically correct, but I can't tell them what to think, and nor do I really want to pretend that I can somehow give them good advice, right? I don't think I can, other than to try to get them to focus on the way they're made and the physiology and anatomy, but that's the only things I can objectively look at and see in a person, other than what they tell me, and then that's based on what they're thinking. But again, if there's that kind of sexual dysphoria or confusion, where they have a gender, a physiology, and anatomy, but they desire the same gender sexually, well, I can't relate to that in a way where I can give relationship advice. So I'm staying with Christian dating, but it will be somewhat applicable to other dating. And when I get into marriage in a MGTOW world, which will be in about 10 minutes, that's when I'll get more general in terms of what's happening societally and beyond just the Christian scene. But let me start with Christians, and then I'll end with why heterosexuals should never take advice from gays or homosexuals, for the same reason I just gave for why I would never give advice or shouldn't be giving advice, or why I don't think I could give advice, good advice, other than the physiology thing, to homosexuals. See, it's the same thing. But sometimes, especially in our society today, that doesn't sound quite right, because a lot of people on the TV, news, and otherwise are either acting homosexual or gay or promoting it in some way. And so it's viewed as like the right thing, and the people talking are giving advice, and so we're like, okay, what do they say? But they're gay. So they're sexually either confused or using their sexuality in a way that is not according to the design they have or the other person. And whether or not that's okay, societally, legally, people who are not gay don't act that way. We don't desire the same things, that's why we're not gay, but we try to get along. And, we can be even temporarily confused, as I've mentioned before, if a man is acting overly feminine, especially if a man doesn't know that it's a man and thinks it's a woman, we can be attracted because we're attracted to femininity. The same thing in a woman. A woman can be attracted by the male qualities in a woman, a lesbian, and a lesbian knows that. That's why they seek out women who are desirous of the male qualities. And they use that to attract them to them versus the man, really interfering with our right as a man to date the woman in a procreative environment where we can hopefully work together. We're going to talk about that more in a minute, though. But the relationships that fail the fastest, according to the data that I reviewed, and I'll put some links in the description below, are lesbian relationships. They cannot satisfy each other in the ways that male and female relationships are satisfying if done correctly. Because one is not the other gender. They're just pretending to be that other gender. And it cannot ultimately satisfy the woman who desires the things that are brought to the table by the opposite gender. All right, so let's move into Christian dating. So as Christians, these things are a little bit more obvious to us. I say obvious only in the sense that we accept them. Right? We're not usually questioning issues like homosexuality or how to have sex. Sometimes that comes up, especially with groups that can get more involved in people's lives than they should, or that they have a right to. But maybe there's a concern and issue at times, and so people's lives become open in ways that become an issue. So there are sometimes questions about things like oral sex and how, to what extent Christians can engage in sex. And that's really for the Christians to decide among themselves, as long as it does not contaminate the other Christians, set a bad example, or directly contradict anything that we can see Jesus or the early Christians taught. Because that's who we follow. We cannot claim at one time that we follow them and then not try to follow what they say. But at the same time, I'm here to say that what I've read does not say anything about other than those who are overseers in the Christian congregation, it does not limit men to having only one woman. And in fact, we use the word wife a lot, but the Bible uses the word woman and man. Now, it doesn't promote this kind of polygamous relationship in a way that is like, okay, this is going to work, this is a good thing, keep doing this. That's not what you're going to read either. In fact, you'll read the opposite, not only of that, but of actual marriage, because in places like 1 Corinthians 7, Paul talks about how, it's interesting, he talks extendedly about these different things, and I think most of us can see that he was correct, because it is difficult to have an ongoing relationship even with a member of the opposite sex. It's a tough world. Even though it has a lot of conveniences, it makes us get used to things, and then when we have to do other things, they become difficult, and we're like, oh no. And then if we have children, we have a lot of time that we must devote, and emotion and energy. And if we're not prepared for that, it can devastate you, and over time drain you in ways that, if you're not enriched through healthy association and spiritual uplifting, can make childbearing more difficult than it ever was intended to be. And so when Paul talks about these things, he basically says it's better if people remain single. He's the original MGTOW, you could say, the Apostle Paul, but it's not just MGTOW, it would be WGTOW too, right? Because he's basically saying both men and women, if you haven't given up your virginity, you'll be happier. He specifies virgins at first because he knows that once you're exposed to sex in ways that become pleasurable, it's more of your interest. And he says that's not wrong, it's not a sin, but he's focused on giving the most to the Lord Jesus in this case, and through him, the God Jah. So Paul's mindset is correct. It is better, as I started out this open session with, thinking of what you're here for in the first place and giving proper respect back to that life. And then recognizing the opportunities that life gave us with other lives, just like he brought Eve to Adam and all the other lives of the creatures that he made. It's the same or similar today, just a different world. And we're obviously a lot less perfect in the sense that Adam didn't have so many difficulties within himself or outside of him. But eventually that's what happened. So Paul is really the first one who started to say, hey, men, you know, everyone's going the way, the Christian way in the Christian sense, but women and men, you're going to have less difficulty. You're going to have less trouble if you don't get together and have a cohabitation, marriage, sexual relationship. He does not say do not do that. In fact, he even specifically says if you do it, you'll do well. But then he says if you don't do it, you'll do better. And the reason he says you'll do better is because, I think this is what I mean by we can probably say he was correct based on experience. Although we know having a family and working together and helping each other grow is the best way. It's how we were made. It's very difficult. It's very difficult right now to get two people, let alone three or more, however many more you would be able to have as a man and not be an overseer. But I'm not going to focus on that for now because the Bible doesn't either. The Bible focuses on what I'm talking about, and that is giving God his due and doing the things we were made to do in terms of helping other people and giving Jah praise. But we also have families, and so when you read Paul in 1 Corinthians 7, you go through this sort of back and forth exchange he has in his letter about the pros and cons of, or the things that are good or better in terms of getting married or having a woman and not, or having a man and not. And then under what conditions you should stay with that man or woman. He says, you know, you won't hear this in the world often, but he states specifically there that a Christian man, if a woman who's not a Christian is willing to live with the Christian man, that the Christian man should let her live with him. He shouldn't send her away. Of course, the Christian woman, if she leaves, the non-Christian woman, if she leaves, that's up to her, right? Same with the Christian woman. Paul goes over those things in there. But my point is, he actually, people often talk about, or at least seem to imply that Christianity is somewhat abusive to women. I don't see how that's the case at all, really, especially if it's done the right way. I'm not speaking about all of the things that are often involved in marriage today, but many of those things aren't what the Bible says need to be done in marriage either, including the way marriage is done, that is with an official license and ceremony. And if anything, in the United States, the conditions of marriage favor the woman, not the man. So how it could be an abusive situation when the woman who is married really has the legal control in most respects, doesn't make any sense, but that just seems to be the way it's promoted. And so either way, it helps to maintain family lines. It helps to keep people focused on a shared goal rather than having all of these different relationships that come and go. And how are you going to be able to focus on Jah ultimately if that's happening? But it's not easy. And so unless you have a person who's willing to give of themselves, as are you, to work together to give Jah his due by following Jesus and helping other people to the extent that we can without not giving attention to the person we've taken as our man or woman. If we can do those things, then we can make a relationship work. A Christian, and by dating, I put dating in quotes because, dating, what are we really talking about? How long do you really need to get to know another Christian in order to know that your shared goal is to praise Jah by following Jesus, treating others the way you want to be treated, and you both are willing to commit to each other to achieve that goal? Just how long does that really need to take? And what number of dates does it take? Doesn't make any sense. I'm not saying you don't get to know a person, but if they're really a Christian, haven't you gotten to know them already? You should. And I might even add, do you really know a person ever? I'm not sure if that's the case either. And so I'm not trying to say you have no choice here. My point is, you don't need to stymie yourself with indecision if you know the person is a dedicated Christian. I'm talking to Christians here. And they're willing to give of themselves, as are you, to praise Jah by following Jesus, treating others the way you want to be treated. Here's the big problem. Everybody makes mistakes. You know what's funny? We know that when it comes to other people. But all of a sudden, when we take on a mate, right? When we take on a woman or a man, we're like, I can't believe he did that. I can't believe she did that. Oh, I'm done. Yet another person, we're all like, oh no, we have to forgive people, and you got to forgive that person. It's like we forget. We become so personally offended by a wrong when we constantly offend and do wrong, and then we don't extend the forgiveness and work together to help him praise Jah. And you don't think that man's under assault? You don't think that man is constantly being tempted in ways that would create a problem for any kind of marriage or relationship? You're wrong. There are all kinds of problems in ways that will create an ongoing problem for you if you're not able to accept and assist a man when he's facing problems. Same with a woman. Men, do you not realize that the woman is under constant assault by feminists, by lesbian women, by a world that's constantly luring them with products? It's a consumer society. And they're marketing to women in ways that are designed to get their attention and have them focus on things other than their own family. I know the live stream interrupted, but don't worry. I have the whole thing being recorded, so I'll upload it later if you missed a segment. But feel free to put your questions down if you have any. So as Christians, I'm going to wrap up this Christian dating and move into marriage in a MGTOW world now. But Christians, you should be understanding and forgiving towards the ones you're taking in as your closest partner and sexual mate the most. But I mean, you're supposed to know the difficulties that person and you are facing, and the whole point is that you're willing to endure them. As long as you don't give up, as long as you don't quit, you're going to take hits. How do you not know that? Yet we act sometimes like we don't know, and then someone does something to offend us and we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. You can't believe it. How did you not know it? How did you not know that could happen or likely would happen? And how were you not prepared to help out or to get through it, to keep going? That's how you survive in a relationship. If you can't do that, you will not. So then Paul's advice is great, right? Just don't try it. Try to wait or not. But if you can do what I just described in the ways that I think you saw too, and that is working together so that both of you or whomever can praise Jah together and help other people by following Jesus, you can do it. And you will do well. But it is difficult. There will be attacks. Are you prepared to help others and yourself to endure so that the ones closest to you, the one you've shared the most with and who believes as you do but failed or is under attack like you, what are you going to do? It just seems to me like we're more willing to forgive other people who aren't even in that relationship with us than we are to the ones who are. So that's where I want to leave the whole Christian dating thing. It's a question of how committed you are. Do you really believe this person's a Christian? Are you really a Christian? And by that I mean, are you willing to forgive each other for the mistakes and things that are going to happen? If you're not, don't have a relationship. It'll be too difficult for you. Paul says right there, and I agree with him. And I think you do too. We know how difficult it is when someone doesn't do something the way we like or betrays us. Well, we do that to Jah every day. He looks at us and forgives us, and we're children in his eyes, but still, we do dumb things. A lot of dumb things. And Jesus came, in our view, to give us the opportunity to have a relationship with his Father, in spite of the fact that we do all these dumb things. And so, when you look even the account I did yesterday in the Let's Talk Sodomy, Genesis 18:19, he had the angels save Abraham and Lot. And it wasn't like they were the most zealous in responding to everything, but they saw what was best in them, regardless of the other things that they knew were present as well. And they used them to fulfill Jah's will, and whether it was preserving Abraham for the nation of Israel or Lot, right? Because his own daughters had proceeded to have an incestuous relationship with him. But if you read the account, there weren't any men around. They got him drunk, so he didn't know what he was doing. And they were trying to preserve his seed. They were at least thinking in some way that was toward the future, and not entirely of themselves, but they were women and alone. And so, but they became the ones who founded the nations of Ammon and Moab. So Jah saved Lot, though, and those two daughters. He knows who we are, and he's willing to give us opportunities to grow. And he accepts who we are. He knows. He gives us things that we can choose. But when it comes to dating and doing the things that we're supposed to do as Christians, if we're not prepared to forgive and work together under the most difficult conditions, right? Whether it's a failure or being confronted with people who are attacking you for being Christian, right? Will they stay with you? Will that person stand behind you? Will you stand behind them? That's what you need to know. So let's talk about marriage in a MGTOW world. So Paul really is the original MGTOW because he's the one, and WGTOW, because as we've been talking about in 1 Corinthians 7, it was the Apostle Paul who said, listen, you men and women, you should go your own way. And the MGTOW movement today, it means men going their own way. And I see some of the videos sometimes, and it's a lot of different guys who have had encounters with women that didn't go well. And I don't know the full story, of course. We all have our side. But, there's a lot of these stories out there, and they're creating it's becoming more and more frequent to hear these stories and to see these people concerned about the way male and female relationships are developing. And part of the problem, as I mentioned before, is the world in which we live and the things that it promotes, which makes it more difficult for us to focus on each other the right way, but more importantly, on the one who gave us life in the first place. Because if we don't have him, the life who gave life to life, or at least, even if you're not a Christian, we're talking MGTOW, marriage in a MGTOW world now, so maybe you're not a Christian. I talked about Christian dating before. But just in general, maybe you don't believe in God at all. You need to have something, some higher vision or belief to keep you together if you're really going to try to be with somebody again and not go your own way. And so, whether that's children, it's very difficult in this world. Again, it's going to require commitment, dedication. There's a reward, but there's a lot of work. Or a higher being, someone you really believe in, not just because someone said this or that, but you've seen, you've checked, and you have good reasons, the best available, I hope, that keep you believing in that being. Now, if that's the case with both of you, that will keep you going because your belief in Jah, in this case, it could be anything. It could just be in a force, right? Star Wars, I don't care. I'm talking marriage in a MGTOW world. Whatever that higher thing is, even some virtue, you don't believe in any power at all, whatever. My point is, and I'm a Christian, so I often will speak with reference to a God or about Jesus. But I am convinced that whether you're a Christian or not, you need something to believe in, something reasonable, not just to believe in, something that has evidence that both of you can grab hold of when you're falling. Because sometimes it's not easy to reach out for each other when you're both trying to climb up. Excuse me. So, having that third thing, that belief, that shared vision of a higher thing or being or virtue or end, objective, whatever it is, it will help you. And I believe that the extent to which you believe in that thing or have a shared acceptance of it will keep you together during the times when you're both falling. Otherwise, if you don't have that kind of thing, and I'm not making a pyramid here, but I gesture, I guess I am making a pyramid, but I'm not trying to. It happens. Okay, so, and I'm not excluding, well, we'll get to Luciferians and others in a moment when it comes to relationship from homosexuals. But and we all have to work together. So we're talking MGTOW and marriage in a MGTOW world. So I'm just here to tell you that if you really want to succeed, I'm going to wrap up this MGTOW part here, WGTOW, because it's really in a Christian sense, Paul being the one, he spoke not just with reference to men. He talks to women there too, virgins, young and old. And he gives advice that sometimes doesn't sound that great because we like to have relationships and we like to have sex. And so we read it and we're like, okay, what do I do? Well, he's trying to help you, okay? He's trying to help you to deal with the difficulty of finding the right person or of not focusing on it if it's going to keep you from praising Jah or following Jesus. So I'm just trying to reinforce that, but at the same time, point out that as he did, excuse me, you will do well if you do decide to have a woman or a man. But you'll do better if you don't because of the difficulty of having someone who's going to be there for you when things become out of hand or hard, trying, a tribulation, I should say. But again, if you have that third thing or if you have a commitment to each other in ways that you can, with a shared belief and vision, hold on to, I think that's the best way because that's how we were made. We were made to love and to satisfy another person and to help each other to give God back his due. If you can do that, if you can suppress whatever desires you have for power or authority beyond that, and within that, there's just a slight variation of roles, right? What are we really talking about? You give the man the option of taking the lead, and if he's acting like a retard, you point it out. Okay? That's not hard. Okay? Most men are not retards. Some are. But if you married him, or if you let him take you in, you can always leave, according to Paul. But then, there are conditions, at least as far as a Christian in his view, being one who was in the first century and who wrote about these things with the others who lived with Jesus. So you can read it for yourself and apply it how you want, and it's, in our view, between you and Jah. My point is, if you're going to have a relationship with somebody, anybody, if you're a Christian or not, I'm not talking just to Christians right now. I'm talking to everybody. If you're going to have a relationship with somebody, you will do best if it's with the opposite gender and it's with somebody who recognizes the things that that gender does best. If they don't, if they're confused at all about who they are and how they're made, right there you know you're going to have problems. And if they're not, and if you both recognize how you're made and you're able to fulfill the role to the extent that as imperfect people, we can. You try, and even if you make mistakes, you work together, right? We don't just quit on each other if we're trying, and especially if we're Christian. But if we're not, I'm talking in general now. But if you really want to make this work, then you need to find somebody who's going to respect the different genders, do their best to appreciate the good things about the gender whom they are, and work together to complement the other gender. Not abusively, but in a way that directs the relationship forward to grow, ultimately to praise Jah. But that doesn't mean you would never, of course, sacrifice things that are necessary for the relationship. But that also doesn't mean you won't have periods of extreme difficulty. That's the whole point of 1 Corinthians 7. So if you want that kind of relationship as a Christian, and you don't recognize the difficulty that you know is coming, that's on you. And if you do recognize it and you're willing to work through it, good for you. If you're a non-Christian or just anybody, right? MGTOW, marriage in a MGTOW world. I'm talking MGTOW in terms of non-marriage. I'm not talking about the whole or every aspect of the MGTOW movement. It's just a popular reference and way of thinking that doesn't involve marriage or one person because of the difficulty that is often involved today. That's what I'm referring to when I reference MGTOW. Or WGTOW, right? I'm referring to Paul here. I'm saying he's really the first. These other people came later and added their own variation in a non-Christian sense, or maybe it's Christian in some sense. I'm trying to deal with both, kind of, because they overlap, as I talked about at the beginning. And now I want to get into the whole homosexual advice thing, because that's what I've been doing, is giving heterosexuals advice. My whole point in this show, as I stated at the start, or around the start, is not to give advice to people I don't know. Right? Because how would I know how to best... Okay. Well, Emily, I agree. I'm not... This isn't like your traditional MGTOW place where we hate... Well, I don't want to say they all hate on women. I don't watch a ton of MGTOW videos, but I've seen enough. They're all over the place. And I watch the women too. There's a lot of videos that pertain to women and men and the different things they do and the relationships they've had. And so I don't think every MGTOW channel or video that I've seen is correct. And some are way over the top as far as the way they reference women. It's not at all how a Christian would do that. Or most men, I would say. But some men are very upset, or they all seem to be kind of hurt in some sense from their relationship. And I'm sure that there are women like that too. So that's why I reference WGTOW and MGTOW. That's kind of the same thing. I'm not really, like I mentioned, getting into the whole movement and the entire range of referencing that takes place within it. I'm more just focusing on the non-marriage. Okay, that's just really where I'm going with the MGTOW association. And so if you're going to try to, you either go your own way in that sense, right, in terms of non-marriage, or you try to make a marriage work. And in my view, you can do that, Christian or non. And even Paul says that Christians can make it work with a non-Christian. if you have some shared vision or goal that you can commit yourselves to and work towards together. So now, as far as homosexual relationship, this is very important, and I'm going to kind of conclude with this. I'll take a look at some of your comments or questions, but we'll try to keep it within 1 hour, unless the questions or discussion goes further. But let me kind of finalize things here in terms of the planned topics. So I explained that I'm not prepared, nor do I care to give homosexuals advice, because I don't share their understanding of how they relate to the gender they have or the anatomy and physiology they have versus their attraction. See, I cannot really get into that perspective in order to give helpful advice. I would just be talking from my heterosexual perspective and then looking at what seems to be a confusion of sorts with regard to the attraction versus the anatomy, physiology. And so at that point, I would try to help the person at least reflect on how they were made, and then ultimately it's up to that person to remain attracted to the same sex or gender or not. I can't really change that. They can or not, I guess, depending on the attraction they have. So I don't see why any heterosexual person would think a homosexual would have good advice for you. And the reason I say that is for the same reason I just explained why I don't think I could give good advice to a homosexual. So I'm not trying to put them down in terms of not treating them as I would want to be treated. I just think they need to accept that they're not qualified. They do not have the perspective as a homosexual that a heterosexual has and would need assistance with if they're having problems. And in my experience, while this may not always be the intent of a person, homosexuals, if you're a heterosexual and you're around homosexuals frequently, more often than not, my experience suggests they want you to be gay. Or at least they're going to really try to find out if you are and make suggestive comments and even, do other things. So, because you're with them and they're gay. And if you start to ask them about heterosexuality, I don't know that I've ever seen that makes them feel comfortable. Now at times I've been a part of discussions that involved gays, and I've noticed that their advice was not correct. And so I thought, well, how could they not know that? And then so I started to think, well, either their perspective is not allowing them to see that, or they're intentionally misleading the heterosexual because they want to have, they're attracted to them. Because if they're really gay, and this, you have to remember this, both men and women, if you're going to the same gender, but to a homosexual of that gender, and you're a heterosexual, and you're asking them to help you with a heterosexual relationship, you need to be very sure that homosexual person isn't attracted to you, because that would be the perfect opportunity for a person who wants to sabotage your relationship with a heterosexual, if their intent is to have a homosexual relationship with you. So that's why if you want advice on a heterosexual relationship, then you should go to a heterosexual of the same gender and just try to make sure that they don't have any interest or involvement with the person you're interested in, because you could face the same problem. It's not like this is a gay-only problem. It's just, if you don't recognize that the homosexual has the same problem that a heterosexual person interested in your mate or person would have, and you come to them and you basically tell them the problems you're having, and then they take advantage of you. Well, so that can happen in both cases. That's my point. So if you go to a homosexual, you need to cover that base. You need to at least have pretty good confidence there's not a conflict of interest here. And then really, ask yourself, what is it that makes you think a homosexual? That is, someone attracted to the same gender, basically. What is it you think that perspective is going to give you on a heterosexual relationship? Now, if you can answer that question and come up with a good reason, I guess, get the advice. But I cannot think of one reason why I would give advice to a homosexual beyond something that would just try to get them to reflect on how they're made, the obvious things that I could see, and I'm not speculating. And so if that's the most I could do toward the homosexual, well, what's the most they could do in the same way toward me? They would have to point me to my physiology and anatomy. And if they're homosexual, they're not going to do that because that's not the key. They're not using that as the reason for their homosexual relationship. It's the attraction. The physiology doesn't fit. And so, I mean, you can do things like we talked about the other day with sodomy, or what today we call sodomy. So homosexual relationships, but the physiology is the part that isn't the fit. And so a homosexual in return couldn't look at me and say, well, Greg, why don't you just focus on, I already am. I'm a heterosexual. So that wouldn't apply to me if a homosexual were using the same thing to me. But I could do that to them and actually be helping them. You see? So my advice to follow their physiology and anatomy, unless there's some, significant mental or other confusion that just in pointing out the obvious objective physiological facts I can't deal with, well, then that's beyond what I can do. And so that's what I meant. But they can't even do that, right? Because that's what I already do. My problem in a heterosexual relationship is not about gender confusion or physiological conflicts with the same gender. It's more of the emotional or structural components, often things like work and other people, family, kids can be difficult. Unless you're really committed and you have hopefully some other support factors. Either way, they're worth it. It's just difficult. So how are they going to help with that? Unless there's a good answer to that question, I just don't think homosexual advice is going to help anyone who's a heterosexual and who's having difficulty dating or in marriage. And I certainly don't see how it could help Christians. But that doesn't mean that homosexuals who are knowledgeable in certain ways or who have exposure with certain things and who aren't going to use their homosexuality or their attraction toward the same gender in a conflicted way, that doesn't mean you can't get good advice from homosexuals. It just means that right out of the gate, you have to ask yourself, is there a conflict of interest? Are they attracted to me and will they sabotage my relationship if I open up with them? And number two, what is it about this homosexual that I'm relying on to give me good advice? Okay, if they're an expert in a field and they're going to give you that expert field advice, then regardless of whether they're homosexual, that's probably okay, right? We want good advice, but you still have to answer that first question, and the second question has to be clear. So in terms of the answer. So you can get advice, good advice from a homosexual. It's just there has to be something there beyond the homosexuality because that's not enough reason. That is a sign of conflict. That doesn't mean that they can't manage the conflict, but it's obviously conflict because the design doesn't fit. And that doesn't mean you still can't have sex or have a relationship. It just means there's conflict. There's not the complementary features that there are in a heterosexual relationship that can then develop the relationship even further with or without kids. Because there's not the same kind of pain or, other involvements that homosexual sex tends to have, whether it's artificial male organs with female relationships, other things, vibrators, toys. We all know this stuff. So I try not to be too standoffish, but I'm not, I try not to talk about it too much. But look, the thing is, there's nothing better than the real thing. And as long as you're both committed, I think when you have a committed relationship with two people where you spend time getting to know each other, satisfying each other's desires, helping each other in ways where you both grow towards a shared objective, I don't think there's anything better than that. And I think when you have a sexual relationship with a person of the opposite gender, and you're able to appreciate that femininity in her and see that she appreciates her femininity too, And she also recognizes what's really masculine in a man, not abuse, but the kinds of things that show leadership, direction, willingness to admit mistakes and grow, as well as provide a structure for others. That's what we do. We're designed that way. Not allowing men to work and to build and to do things is not going to make men better. And in fact, I would argue that it's what's causing a lot of men to be worse or to react in ways that seem aggressive. And so we have, as some are saying, some MGTOW and MGTOW channels and beliefs that are not in no way really Christian or even, in my opinion, truly masculine. They're more just angry, and we can all get upset. But the question is, are we willing to work past those feelings? Especially as Christians, let me go back to that. If you have any kind of Christian association, you're willing to forgive other people. You ask for forgiveness yourself. Are you willing to forgive the person you have a relationship with in the closest sense possible? How far are you willing to go with that? I think the answer to that question will go a long way in answering how far your relationship will go. And so there's some questions. Many MGTOWs say, maybe, I haven't looked at that. There's a comment about, well, someone doesn't like the MGTOW things, and I can appreciate why. I've seen a lot of the videos, not all, I'd say maybe half or more are not quite, well, they're just different men from different experiences, and most of them are not good experiences. So I think if you look at their videos and their channel contents in that light, they're having these experiences, and we're only hearing one side, that's true. So then there are females that say, well, wait a minute, we have these issues too. And that's true to some extent. That's why I mentioned MGTOW. I think that, hopefully that was right. It was my way of making at least a reference to women who say, hey, we're not down with the way men are today, and we're going to go our own way. But let me say this for you women who are not trying to work with men as women. If you just end up with another woman who looks like or acts like a man, I'm not sure that's going to make things better. And in fact, the statistics show, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that lesbian relationships end faster than heterosexual relationships. So I don't know how reliable the data is, but I know that's a statistic I recently read. I'll provide below. So, if you're looking for maleness, you're going to find that mostly in a man. And if it's a woman who's just making herself like a man, unless you're sure that's what you want and you're going to be happy with that, then maybe you should just look for a man and find someone who's compatible with you, at least on some fundamental levels, and allows you to be you while you allow him to be him. And I think the best way we're going to be able to do that is by agreeing on a shared goal and vision that we can help each other with and fulfill together. So I thank you all for joining me today. We're just at about an hour. We'll have other discussions, but I wanted to have this show. We did the Let's Talk Sodomy show yesterday, and I did that because it comes up, but people don't like to talk about it much. And we helped it. We helped the whole sodomy cause, right? Because we defined it properly. We showed that historically, at least according to Genesis 18 and 19, it really doesn't involve explicitly anal sex like it does today. Most people refer to it or think of it that way. It refers to abusive male attraction toward other males, which ultimately can lead to anal sex. So I think we did a favor to the sodomy community, at least in providing some accurate information so that people are aware of different things. And I'll take a look at all of your comments later. I'd love to talk to you all at different points if you have other comments or thoughts about these issues. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow morning. This channel is primarily, we work our way through different historical and biblical books because a lot of my history is tied with reading and translating these texts. So I present the knowledge that I have on a regular basis. We do what are called day texts in the morning, Monday through Saturday, between 5:30 and 6:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then we do different shows on the weekend like this and other shows that I hope are helpful. and present good information that we can all use in the world in which we live.